Hello there everyone, it is Toby from TIJ Music and welcome to a new video. Today it is time for another album review and today we are reviewing Neil Diamond's 1976 album, Beautiful Noise. Now, I reviewed September Morn a few weeks ago and it's two polar opposites here, I think. I think September Morn is one of the poorest albums in Neil Diamond's catalogue. This one is one of the most complete, consistent albums in Neil Diamond's catalogue. I think I'd probably rate it as the best album. It is really tricky to tell until you go through the songs like I like to do on these reviews, but this has to be up there. You know, the top 3-5 Neil Diamond albums, it is a very, very good album. It's the third album in the new era for Neil Diamond, at least, after joining Columbia Records in 1973 with the Jonathan Livingston Seagull soundtrack, then Serenade in 1974, and this was probably the best out of those three albums. And something that is very rarely noted on album covers is who's produced them. You can see here that this album is produced by Robbie Robertson. Now, you could just take that as a passing remark and think, nah, it's not really important. But here, it is very, very important. Robbie Robertson, known for his work with The Band, not Neil Diamond's band, but The Band. That's what the group was called, The Band. And there's definitely a difference in sound between this and Neil Diamond's earlier records. There's no question about that. But it is so tricky to figure out whether it's for one of two reasons. Whether it's because of the concept of this album. This album really reflects on the struggles of a songwriter in Tin Pan Alley in New York. It's not necessarily focused on one person, but a lot of the songs talk about that sort of element. But it's whether it's about that, whether Robbie Robertson wants to change the sound to reflect that, or whether it's a deliberate attempt to try and change Neil Diamond's sound. Unfortunately, we'll never really know, because the follow-up to this, I'm glad you're here with me tonight, I'm fairly sure wasn't produced by Robbie Robertson. So we have this single album in Neil Diamond's catalogue, which we all know Neil Diamond's an enigma anyway, but it's one of those unanswered questions about Neil Diamond, whether this was just meant to be one album, you know, one album by itself, very much isolated from everything else. It's so tricky to know, but there's no doubt that Robbie Robertson does change Neil Diamond's style here, and it's certainly for the better. Now, I have got a Neil Diamond book here, and this is really worth reading. It's called, I'm trying to keep my hand on the page, that's why. It's called He Is, I Say, of course, a bit of a rip-off of I Am, I Said. How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Neil Diamond by David Wilde, and it's a brilliant book. I read it a few years ago, but just a quick extract out of it, which I found really interesting. In an initially surprising but ultimately savvy move, Diamond chose this time to shake things up, for Beautiful Noise of course, by asking his Malibu neighbour Robbie Robertson to produce his next studio album. The very notion of pop superstar Neil Diamond working with a critic's darling like Robbie Robertson seemed like a shock to the system, but as Robertson told VH1, a lot of people, they were like, wait a minute, is this a put-on? What is going on here? It doesn't fit you, Neil Diamond, your background, his background, doesn't work at all. And Robbie Robertson said, don't you tell me what fits, I'll show you what fits. And it's another tricky one to note, because this is an isolated album. If you look at this from a figures point of view, a mathematical point of view, there isn't any direct comparison between one album and another album with Robbie Robertson. Because this is an isolated album, it's so tricky to tell whether people liked this album because of the sound that Robbie Robertson put onto the album. We'll never really know, I don't think, whether it's Robertson's influence, Diamond's influence, or a real bond at the both. It is tricky to know, but this is an isolated effort, but it is a very good one. There's 11 tracks on the album, released in 1976, I think I've already said that, under Columbia Records. Released with 3 singles, If You Know What I Mean, Don't Think Feel, and the title track, Beautiful Noise. Now, If You Know What I Mean was a #1 hit on the Billboard Easy Listening chart. Don't Think Feel went to number 43 in the US charts, and Beautiful Noise actually went to number 13 in the UK, which is great. I'm from the UK, whoop-de-doo. And Neil Diamond never got a #1 over here, but Beautiful Noise, one of his most known tracks. I know when he did a Glastonbury concert about 10 or 12 years ago now, I think that was the opening track. It is one of Neil Diamond's most known tracks, but there are some real gems that are in this album, so I'll cover those in just a minute. So the album went platinum in the US with 1 million sales, went gold in the UK with 100,000 sales. What's interesting here is that it actually sold less than the 2 albums that came after it, which were I'm Glad You're Here With Me Tonight and You Don't Bring Me Flowers. And in my personal opinion, again, this is my opinion, those 2 albums don't come close to Beautiful Noise. So it's whether the momentum that Beautiful Noise shot through Neil Diamond's album sales, it is tricky to tell. Of course, remember that this really wasn't anything new for Neil Diamond to go platinum. I think all of his releases, bar one in the 70s, went to platinum in the US. I feel like it might well have been Stones. I feel like there was one album that stuck out when I was looking through earlier, but unfortunately I haven't got the notes here. But I know there's one album in the 70s that didn't quite go platinum. But nevertheless, I feel like this one was a real springboard for Neil Diamond to build on, and personally, I don't really think he did, so that might support the theory that perhaps Robbie Robertson's production changed things, but who knows? I mean, we all know from a lot of groups that I follow, I'm particularly and usually a hard rock fan, so if we look at groups like AC/DC, Back in Black is probably their best album. Their follow-up wasn't as good, but it was still a good album. The point I'm trying to make is that follow-ups are hard, and very rarely groups, solo artists, whatever musical artist it might well be, follow-ups are hard. So there are 11 tracks on this album, all written by Neil Diamond himself, apart from the last track, which is called Dry Your Eyes, and that was co-written with the producer Robbie Robertson. So on this album we've got Beautiful Noise, Stargazer, Lady O, Don't Think Feel, If You Know What I Mean, Surviving the Life, other way around, Surviving Life is track 5. And then on side 2 of the vinyl, we've got Street Life, Home is a Wounded Heart, Jungle Time, Signs, and Dry Your Eyes. And I can tell you already from the ratings I've given these tracks, it is a fairly consistent album. Just to show the inner sleeve off, which is really interesting. There's a bit of a note at the bottom, which if you can't read, I will read it out in a minute. There's a picture of Diamond, of course, on the front, and all the credits for all the different songs on the back, because it was quite an extensive band that played on this album. This album is a series of recollections seen through the eyes of a young songwriter making his way through the streets of New York City's Tin Pan Alley in the early 60s. Neil Diamond. It is made up of people, places and events from a period which some have called the Renaissance of the American spirit, others the beginnings of a new age of decadence. Whatever history calls it, the early 60s opened the door to a new wave of consciousness for most of those who pass through its beautiful but noisy portals. Neil. The album does very much feel like that. It does feel like, although there's not a common theme between all the tracks, I'm just going to show the LP off, there's nothing fancy about it particularly here, if it helps if I get it the right way up. Just all the tracks under the standard CBS label here, as you can see. But it's a good album, and I'll stop talking about all the introductions. Let's go through the album track by track. So the first track on the album then is the title track, Beautiful Noise. And this really is one of Neil Diamond's signature tracks. It's a 10 out of 10, this. It talks about his inspirations that come from the beautiful noise of the city. It's catchy, great lyrics, Neil Diamond staple. Not much more to say about that one, 10 out of 10. And for those of you that might not have watched my reviews before, what I do, I go through every single track, give it a rating out of 10, and then take an average of those at the end of the review to bring a rating out of 10. The second track on the album then is Stargazer, which I've given a 7 out of 10. It's a nice groovy track. It's almost groovy. It's not quite groovy, but it's almost groovy. It's a nice follow-on from Beautiful Noise. Doesn't really boast anything particularly. It's not necessarily a highlight on the album, but it's a good track. It's listenable, and as I've put in my notes, a good consistent album track. We then go to track 3, Lady O, which is an 8 out of 10 for me. A little bit better than Stargazer. It's a great ballad, and I'm a little bit guilty for this. I think I've risen the bar here because of the saxophone solo. Now, I've done a few reviews before with saxophone tracks, and I'm a killer for a saxophone solo. And it's a great one here. The song builds over the track, the saxophone a real highlight, and the arrangement, the orchestration, we'll talk about this with quite a lot of tracks. It's perfect. It really fits, and it's a great ballad. I think it's one of Neil Diamond's real underrated tracks. Track number 4 then, Don't Think Feel. Again, this one, another 7 out of 10, another consistent track. It's a bit of a Caribbean rhythm on this one, and some people I've read reviews that say, well, I don't really see the theme of this album. It's meant to be a concept album, but there's no real theme. I agree with that to some extent, because some of the tracks, like Don't Think Feel, you're going from a real ballad to something that's almost a Caribbean rhythm. It doesn't really fit. But the title in Beautiful Noise really encapsulates all of this, because it shows how you've got beautiful noises coming from whatever you have here, whether it is a Caribbean rhythm or a ballad, or almost even a rock track, which we'll cover a little bit later in Jungle Time. But they're all pulled off well, and this is something that maybe Neil Diamond struggled to do later on when he started to do the likes of reggae. I mean, he did the reggae strut, was it on Serenade? No. And there were a few other tracks that followed on later albums that just didn't fit, but the tracks that were done on this album to fit a little bit of a different style worked. And that's why Neil Diamond doesn't fit into the pop category or the easy listening category. He does go into a lot of different genres, and on this album certainly it works. And Don't Think Feel, catchy, simple, nice Caribbean rhythm, it's listenable. And again, another good consistent album track, so another 7 out of 10 there. Track number 5, Surviving the Life, a good up-tempo song similar to the last one. Almost a gospel feel here. So again, we're going from very much a ballad to Caribbean to gospel, and then we track 6 back to a ballad. So there's lots of different styles here. So it really suits everyone, I would say, but it is pulled off well again. Very listenable, very enjoyable, and much like really track 2, there's nothing complex about this one, but the simpler the better sometimes, and a really good track. But you have to end side 1 with the best track from the album, really. I don't think there's any denying that. And that is If You Know What I Mean. And I really can't disagree with the singles choice here. You've got Don't Think Feel, which is a good track, understandably a single. Beautiful Noise we've covered, which is one of the highlights of the album. And then If You Know What I Mean. What can be said about this? It went to number 1 in the Billboard Easy Listening charts. It's an absolute killer track. The lyrics here are some of Neil Diamond's best, period. Particularly the lines when we gave it away for the sake of a dream in the penny arcade, if you know what I mean. It's brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. It actually refers to some of the regrets that Neil Diamond had in his youth. But interestingly, according to Neil, it's a recollection of an encounter in his teens with a significantly older woman. I feel like I've heard that one before with Desiree, but it doesn't quite fit, that doesn't. But yeah, it's similar to Desiree, but it is, again here, another clear highlight in the case for Neil Diamond is a criminally underrated songwriter. The arrangement, timing is superb here. And it's really good on the Love at the Greek live album as well. It's just a pity that it wasn't done early enough to be on Hot August Night, because if you'd have added that Hot August Night, as well as some of the brilliant tracks on that, yeah. It's already stratospheric, his Hot August Night, but if you know what I mean, added to that would be even better. We then go to side number 2, and we start with the first track from side 2, which is very similar to the title track, I find. It's Street Life. I do find Beautiful Noise and Street Life to be the 2 tracks with the closest thread, and obviously they're explicitly about the city, but apart from that, I can't quite put my finger on the similarities between. But nevertheless, a good track. It does open the Love at the Greek album in 1977. Another solid track, not quite as good as the title track, but again, it's another 7 out of 10. We then go to track number 8, which, quite ironically, is an 8 out of 10. And this is a real hidden gem, the only non-single. I can understand why it wasn't a single, but a bit of a shock that it wasn't a bigger track. Another underrated track, definitely, is Home is a Wounded Heart. It's a hidden gem, definitely. It's another track where I feel the additional elements added by Robbie Robertson really enhances this one. It's one of the shorter tracks on the album, and it doesn't necessarily overstay its welcome. It's another solid album track, and one that you can really put into the Neil Diamond Best Of category. Really solid track. We then get to track number 9. Again, another 7 out of 10. You can see that there isn't a rating that goes below 7 here, which I haven't reviewed, of course, all of Neil Diamond's albums, but I could probably bet you for probably 90% of Neil Diamond's albums, there's one track in there below a 7 out of 10, and this is why this has to be Neil's most consistent album, I think I would say. So track number 9 is another 7 out of 10, as I've said. This one is Jungle Time. Now, as a rock fan, I do gravitate towards this one. Again, another different style with a bit of almost pop rock. And to be honest, like many rock tracks, I haven't really got any idea what it's on about, apart from Neil telling someone to strut their stuff. Nevertheless, it's another solid rocking track, a really good track. The penultimate track, we are getting through these quickly, the penultimate track is called Signs. And this is another slow song in the same vein as Home is a Wounded Heart, but it's more extended and therefore has the ability to grow as the song develops and goes further in. Now, the arrangement and orchestration, once again, is excellent. You'll notice here that on a lot of the tracks I say this, and this one is almost adult contemporary, which, okay, I know is very similar to easy listening, and actually, I was watching a documentary about the joys of easy listening, the joys of easy listening, not the joys, easy listening, a few weeks ago, and that was saying how potentially the two categories almost became amalgamated because some artists didn't like the term easy listening, but I think this one is more towards the adult contemporary genre, whatever that might mean, but we're not going to go into all that here. And this is one actually that I do struggle to link to the common theme of the album. It's a bit of an outlier there. I can't quite puzzle it together myself, but nevertheless, it's another solid, listenable, consistent, good album track. and it's easy listening without being cringe. You know, I think if there was another element, I can't quite put my finger on it, but if it was a little bit more dumbed down, it wouldn't be good at all, but it's just right, and that's what this album is, just right. So the final track on the album then is an 8 out of 10, a little bit better than the previous, and it is another highlight in this album. It's called Dry Your Eyes, and this is the only track on the album, as I mentioned earlier, that Neil did not write exclusively. Robbie Robertson is credited as a co-writer here along with Neil Diamond, and it's a real highlight. Excellent lyrics, excellent arrangement. It's great all round, and in Robertson's memoir, Testimony, which unfortunately I haven't got, Robertson did explain that the song was actually inspired by how people felt after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Because remember, this was, you know, still fairly raw after that period, the civil rights movements of the 60s, the late 60s, and of course this album is meant to be about the 60s, so it's still quite raw in terms of the album releasing in 76 after this, but it's really important to note that, of course, the album is almost set, if you like, 10 years earlier. So it's really raw after Martin Luther King's demise by assassination. And it's a very strong end to the album. So, well, you've heard the ratings. How good does this album come out at? You know, I've said that it's probably one of Neil Diamond's best albums. And probably one of my favourite albums of all. Now, most of the great albums on the channel that I've ranked are 9 out of 10. This one comes out at a 7.8 out of 10. And I think it is fair to say that because it's Neil Diamond's most consistent album, that it comes out nearly at an 8. Not quite there. Mostly 7s, some 8s, some 10s. So it does reflect that fact that there's a lot of solid tracks. But that 0.8, more towards the 8 out of 10 mark, does suggest that it is more towards that. What am I saying here? I don't really know what I'm saying, but it's a strong 7, if you like, which shows how consistent this album is. I always think with Neil Diamond album reviews and his albums in general, that it's going to be tricky to get a top album verdict, to get a 8 or 9 out of 10, because I don't think Neil's ever made a top album. It's one of those strange questions about Neil Diamond's career. If you're going to point someone to a Neil Diamond album who's never listened to Neil Diamond before, you would probably say the Beautiful Noise album. But it is a very strange question with Neil Diamond, because he's never made a top album, a 10 out of 10 album, one of those holy grails. But if you amalgamate some of the best tracks from his albums together, you have a whopping 50-60 track greatest hits set, you know, and that just shows how good Neil Diamond is. It's a great listen, this, though. It's consistent throughout, which is really important. It's got great highlights as well. The title track, if you know what I mean, Home is a Wounded Heart, Dry Your Eyes, and some great tracks in between to make a solid set of album tracks that really surround them and make it a great album. It's a real feel-good album, actually, and it's got some reflective moments as well, and as always, some excellent Neil Diamond songwriting, and an interesting difference with the production of Robbie Robertson, which I talked about earlier. So, what do you think? Is this Neil Diamond's best album? I think I think so. I haven't delved into it too much, comparing it to the other albums, but as an isolated album, which I said again, I think this is probably Neil Diamond's best album. I guess we'll know for certain after I analyse some of Neil Diamond's other albums, the likes, I think, of Moods, Stones even, Just For You. I mean, Just For You is one that's an interesting enigma as well, because it's under the band Records name and very much kind of a singles album, but there's some top-notch music on that album. But yeah, that's it for today's review of Beautiful Noise. I hope you've all enjoyed. I'd just like to say a huge thank you for the response to some of Neil Diamond album reviews and videos recently. It's tricky to cover anybody else other than Neil Diamond recently, because you all seem to really be enjoying, which is excellent. So keep the comments flowing about what you think about this album. And if you haven't watched any of the previous videos on Neil Diamond about the September Morn album, the Velvet Gloves and Spit album, his best deep cuts of the 60s, and also 10 tracks that you should go and listen to, perhaps if you are someone who's never listened to Neil Diamond before. There are some good videos about Neil Diamond on all extent of the Neil Diamond fan scale, I would argue. But thank you all for your company today. It is really appreciated. Leave a like as well if you enjoyed, and subscribe to the channel for regular album reviews, top 10s, all that sort of good stuff. I've been Toby from TIJ Music. Thank you for watching, and if you get the chance, if you get half an hour, 40 minutes today, stick this album on, whether it's on the vinyl, whether it's on the CD, Spotify, YouTube, whatever. It is a real good feel-good listen, and I think you'll enjoy it, as I clearly do. Thank you for watching today. I've been TIJ Music, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye for now.